I feel that it's an interesting time to work as a statistical consultant because there's an abundance of data which continues to become more and more available. However, an increased quantity of data doesn't always mean it's going to be better quality. So there's a number of challenges that we're faced with increasing availability of data. So as mentioned, I work for Data Analysis Australia, which is a specialty data science and statistical consultancy firm based in Western Australia and has been around for over 30 years. Our focus is on working collaboratively with clients and using data to provide insightful business solutions. And we consult in a variety of industries and application areas for government and business. There are a number of challenges we're faced in commercial consulting when considering data analysis. In addition to just the general statistical methodologies, we have to consider our needs of the clients. And so we're often working on multiple projects at the same time, each with very tight time and budget constraints. With such a variety of data and projects, it requires a wide understanding of statistics as well as an understanding of how to code efficiently. And we also, in considering what we deliver to the client, we have to acknowledge that the clients often don't understand the statistical concepts. So there are several ways that our company overcomes these challenges. For example, we ensure projects are well scoped and planned prior to commencing, and because fixing mistakes and redoing analysis would be at our own expense, so it's important to get it right. We have to consider what would provide the client with the best value for their budget. And I'm lucky to work with a number of talented statisticians, so we can draw upon the skills of each person and work together to solve problems. And as I mentioned, we use coding and automation and documentation to ensure our work is done efficiently and repeatable and less prone to errors. And we also use regular communication with the client to ensure our projects stay on target and deliver what the client wants. So there's such a variety of data, all with different issues. And increasingly large and complex data sets, it's easy to get overwhelmed, but also data is quite interesting, so it's easy to get off focused. An additional challenge is that as a consultant, we rarely receive a clean and ready to use data set. So what types of errors can be expected? Just provided here are some examples of typical errors that we'll see in data. So it could be a badly defined population, non-representative sample selection, transcription or data entry error. So even in automated data, over time, the automation process could be improved, which would skew the results. Often get missing data or non-response, and deliberately false responses possible to occur as well. In surveys, we've got to be careful about leading questions and communication error. So I thought I'd provide here a few tips to obtain an appropriate working data set. So my first tip is to look at your data. What's the size and the fields in your data? How many rows and what is covered? It's important to talk to your client about the data. They often have a better idea of what's what they expect to see in the data, and if it doesn't match up with what you see, then you need to talk through to work out exactly what is in the data. And as I said, at all stages we'll use computer code, so it can be a more efficient process and be repeated with updates to the data, etc. And I'd also suggest having a look at a summary of the fields or visual graphical displays of the data, and also understand the level of missingness and erroneous values and duplicate records. So have a look to if the values are within the expected range. For example, if you're expecting all positive values and you get negatives, you may want to talk to your client about that to see if the data is different to what you expect, or perhaps they're just incorrect values there. And with, as I said, with increasingly large and complex data, it can be pretty much impossible to look at the data set as a whole. So it's a bit overwhelming. So it's a good idea to just look at sections of the data or a sample of the data or at an aggregated level, just to still get an idea of what your data actually contains and the level of error within it. So my other tip here is to consider what question you are trying to answer to stay focused on what's actually required. Are there parts of the population missing, and what is the data source? If not all the data that's required to answer the question, you may need to talk to your client about suggesting additional data sources that may be required. And also, is all the data relevant to your question? With large data sets, it can be a lot more efficient and sometimes more appropriate to subset the data. Perhaps only certain dates are of interest, for example, to simplify or aggregate the data to relevant levels or take a sample. And at all stages, it's important to liaise with your clients and also others, your colleagues, to ensure you stay on focus on what question you're answering. It can be practically impossible to check every single value to ensure that it is correct. And sometimes you just can't obtain a perfect data set, so sometimes you will have to make assumptions and state the limitations within the data. So I just thought I'd provide a couple of examples from work that I've been involved with at my time in Data Analysis Australia. So one of very large data set was on electricity consumption, which in recent years is being able to be recorded at a finer and finer level, so at say 15, 5, and even 1 minute level across a number of customers. So depending on the question that we were required to answer, we would aggregate this data across customers and, for example, at an hourly level, which heavily reduces the amount of data that you're working with. It also makes the data less volatile, which at a fine level, electricity data is very volatile. And yeah, it just makes it to a manageable size. Another example of a project was to estimate the error in manually entered financial data. And to look at every record would be take an enormous amount of time. So we were able to take a sample of the data for the client to check the true values, and then we could estimate the error within the data set. And sometimes we're contracted to design surveys and sample to obtain data. And I've got a couple examples here of one. We were asked to design a sample of heavy vehicles across Australia to understand the level of roadworthiness, and also community surveys. For these projects, we able to utilise the data available publicly to understand the population. And we've talked, for example, having a look at the registered vehicles and talking with the client to narrow down on exactly what level of detail they require and what level to group vehicles in, so we can get a sufficient sample size for each strata. For community surveys, there's like other data sources available as well to understand the population, including information on addresses, census data, boundary information. And so we use all these to help come up with our sampling strata and sample sizes. I'm guessing I'm running out of time here, so I'll say thank you again for letting me talk, and I'll stop sharing here.
Lovely, thank you very much, Elise. Thanks for giving us a great overview of the work that you're involved in at DAA. And if people have questions, they can hold on to them to the end of the set of presentations. That'd be great. So thank you to Elise. And we'll move on to our next presenter, Graham Hepworth from the Statistical Consulting Service at the University of Melbourne. He has many years of experience consulting at Melbourne and in other organisations, and I'd like to hand over to him now, and we're looking forward to hearing about statistical consulting and the art of the possible. Thanks, Graham.
Okay, can you see my screen there? Or I'll have
yes,
to,
yes, we've got the double screen showing up at the moment.
Yeah, okay, so wait a minute, I'll just move that across. Maybe I'll need to share the other one. So is that coming up, Alice, or is that?
We're still seeing the presenter view. I think if you go to slide view, it depends how if you've got a double screen. I'm not sure.
I've got a double screen, so hang on. I'll just move. No, it's because I've got. So what are you seeing at the moment? The
just you at the moment.
Okay, so all right, I'll try sharing again. So if I go share, so now you'd be seeing the
main PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint.
Screen, yeah.
Yeah. So that's all okay, is it? Or do I need to maximise it?
If you try maximising it, perhaps we'll be in business.
Yeah, then it goes onto the other screen.
No, we'll stick with what we got. I got what we had, I think.
Okay.
Graham, you need to share the others. You need to switch which screen you're sharing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's share the other screen.
Okay, so share screen and do the other one. Is that better? Oh, wait a minute. How's that? Is that better?
Lovely.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah.
No, that's lovely.
Okay. Now I just got to put my notes on the other screen.
Oh, that's going to be tricky.
Yep. How's that?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Sorry about this. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. Is that all okay, Alice?
Yeah, that's looking great. Thanks. Take it away,
Okay,
Graham.
great. Sorry. I've had 5 jobs in my working life, and the only one that didn't involve some statistical consulting was my first as a maths teacher. And I'm glad I'm not doing that at the moment in Melbourne. My current workplace, there it is. There's all my colleagues up there on the balcony, and it's now about 6 months since we've been there. that's what it should. That's where we should be. A couple of years ago, I was asked to give a talk on statistical consulting, and I thought about what qualities are needed, and came up with the following 5. Now, I'm not the only one to do that. This has been done in books and in papers and all that sort of thing, but these are the ones I came up with. The first 2 are true of just about any profession. Like if a trade comes to do a job at your place, then you usually want to know whether they can actually do the job, whether they're competent, and whether they're going to operate in your best interests, the trustworthiness. And I think these 2 are fundamental to statistical consulting. And I often get a sense that that's what somebody is trying to work out in the first few minutes they spend with me. Then, of course, there's many other attributes that are important. And if you look at them, then a lot of them are actually soft skills, or what's called soft skills. And that's what's often needed. Surveys have found that that hirers of people, LinkedIn found out this in a survey they did, that about 2/3 of employers found it harder to find people who could work well in a team and interact well with others than those that had the right technical skills. So these softer skills are a major part of what's needed in consulting. And after my talk, Chris Triggs from Auckland came up to me and said, well, I think there's another one, Graham. I think curiosity is really important. And I realise that because often I want to share with my family some of the content of what I've consulted about during the day. And I realised how interested I am in what I've covered on that day. And usually they are as well. So that's really important. And then there's transactional skills such as negotiation, agreeing on who is doing what by when. Yeah, you just can't avoid those sort of skills in consulting. Then I've added another one, which is what I'd call a COVID quality, being able to consult online. But all of these, you can add to them or modify them. But I'm using them as a lead up to the one I want to talk about today, and that is judgment as to what is needed or what is achievable, what is possible. And that's why I've called my talk The Art of the Possible. A few years ago, the Statistical Consulting Centre did a survey of all our clients in a year. And we came up with a whole lot of associations that we looked at. And one of them was the usefulness of discussions to the client and statistical complexity as scored by the consultant, that is us. And if you look at the graph here, which has the percentages on the horizontal axis and the actual numbers at the end of each line, you find that we got a pretty good spread of complexities along here, but we didn't get a very good spread of satisfaction. And that's because too many people were very satisfied with what we did. And that's a good problem to have, I guess. But nevertheless, within this limitation, there was a significant association. If you look at the trend of this line, whoops, it goes down towards the bottom left, and it meant the data to be very satisfied with greater complexity. And that's not surprising because I guess you'd expect that greater complexity is an extra hurdle for the consultant to manage. And so that was a finding that wasn't surprising to us. You might also ask, do we really care about the distinction between people being satisfied and very satisfied? Well, we do actually, and I think a lot of consultants would identify with that. We want people to be very satisfied if possible. So it was good to be able to just distinguish between that. Then another association we looked at was that between quality of service as perceived by the client, of course, and client competence, obviously in the view of the consultant. And again, the client competences were well spread across the 5 categories, but we again had the problem that our perceived quality of service was overwhelmingly very good. Anyway, the fact is here that there wasn't much association between the two, and that was good as well. You might expect those with basic competence to be helped more and to find the service very good. Or alternatively, they might struggle with the stats, and those that are more competent might make more progress. But there wasn't a trend either way. And I want to suggest part of this consistency of high quality service across a range of client competence was due to the sound judgment of the consultant as to what is needed and what the client can handle. If someone has a fairly basic level of competence, then hitting them with a technique that appeared in the last issue of Biometrica is probably overkill. They're likely to struggle. On the other hand, if someone shows a fair degree of competence and perhaps has tried a few things in R, and you work out that their study has a multi-level variation structure, then you can pretty confidently introduce them to mixed models and fixed and random effects. A clear case of where there may be a few analysis options is with an ordinal response variable. And my master's minor thesis back a long time ago was on analysis ordered categorical data. And I managed to find the hard copy at home. And I looked up the back, and my recommendation in the thesis was to use ordinal regression. And it wasn't that long after Peter McCullough's foundational paper on the topic. It's a very clever technique, but I've found in consulting that the results are usually difficult to interpret for people who haven't been trained in statistics. I therefore admit I will look for something simpler if I think the client will struggle too much. So here are some options that I've listed that may not be exhaustive, but I think I've covered most of them. Options 1 and 4 are the alternatives that I would recommend most often, assuming a linear scale or creating a binary variable. So I will usually quiz the person on whether the categories that they have are essentially a rounding of an underlying continuous scale or close to it. Or I'll ask them whether most of the responses are 2 categories, or whether they're really only interested in whether the responses are at the top or the bottom, and so on. So I will look for alternatives that they will be able to cope with or that are possible. Now, I'm not suggesting that a statistical consultant should recommend a dodgy or inappropriate statistical procedure. For instance, I always dig my heels in on design issues. Recently, I had a researcher setting up a trial on supporting bereaved parents in the early loss of a pregnancy. The intervention was special training for healthcare providers combined with an evidence-based information brochure for the parents. Now, the study had many good attributes, but one major weakness: there were no controls. And I raised this with the researcher, and she said, but it's before versus after, so it's okay. And we really need to give the intervention to everyone. She was so committed to the cause that it seemed to blind her to the inherent weakness of her argument. So I had to bring up all sorts of counter arguments, including, well, you'll have trouble publishing this if you don't have controls. And she eventually succumbed. And then by the end of our time, she was really enthusiastic about using controls. It was an exhausting consultation, but a successful one. So I'm not advocating a consultant letting anything go. And I've made mistakes in that regard. I've sometimes endorsed a more simple analysis for someone that I don't think will handle anything complicated. And then their colleague comes back and says, well, why didn't you do this, this, and this? And I end up having to backtrack and do a bit more explaining. Anyway, back to the survey of clients that we ran at our centre. We grouped the competence of the clients into 3 groups of approximately equal size to see how it panned out in terms of the ideas and the concepts that were covered in our consultations. So an example was mixed models. These give the percentages of consultations when particular ideas related to mixed models were raised in the consultation. So you can see there the percentages ranging from about 10 to 40%. And the 3 arms within each idea category are the 3 levels of competence. And you can see that consistently the most competent group was associated with a higher proportion of these ideas being raised. So, whoops, what have I done? Sorry, I'll just, I've clicked on something. Let's keep going there. Go. So those, you can see that those, that the more competent they were, the more likely those ideas were to be raised. And so if the choice of statistical technique was based purely on technical aspects of the study, you'd expect those 3 groups to be closer together in terms of these percentages. Of course, more competence in statistics may lead to someone to embrace a more complicated problem, but I don't think that would explain all the differences. So that suggests that in practice, we do modify the choice of statistical technique we recommend to our clients based on what they can handle and what is needed. And I'm saying that that's a good and necessary thing for statistical consulting. So that's why it's the art of the possible. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you for sharing the results of the survey of your own group's clients. I think that's given all of us something to think about in terms of how we interact with people seeking advice, whether we're in consulting units or in other contexts. So yeah, thank you very much, Graham. Our third presenter in this panel discussion is Huan Jin Yoon. Jin is a statistical consultant here at the consulting unit at the Australian National University. He also has many years of experience consulting in a variety of organisations. And so I'll pass over to Jin to unmute and share your screen, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Graham, I think I can
Thank you.
stop your sharing, and I'll pass over to Jin.
Just want to share my screen. Gee. Alice, can you say this?
Yes, all good. We can see your slides. Thanks. Take it away, Jin. Thank you very much. Some challenges in statistical consulting in the university.
So yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me in this talk. And today I'm going to talk about the statistics consulting in the university and some challenges. And in this talk, I talk about a little bit about the statistical consulting. What is the statistical consulting, and then this statistical consulting role, and then finally I just raised some sort of the challenge in the university. doing the static consulting. Okay, just it. So the what is a statistical consulting? Statistical consulting is the collaboration of a statistician with a researcher for devising the solution to a research problem involving data, right? Therefore, in a way, you can think of the statistical consulting as a starting point for the interdisciplinary research. And also the statistical consulting is complex activity that requires the statistical and non-statistical skill as well. So the way approaching to the statistical consulting has to be the problem-minded, not the solution-minded. In other words, the consultant is helping the client to understand the nature of the problem so that the client themselves can take the appropriate action and develop the greatest statistical competence in the process. So in this perspective, the statistical consulting has two goals. The one is to solve an immediate statistical or methodological problem. Another one is the increase the capacity of the client to understand and solve the similar problem in the future. That is the two goals of the statistical consulting. Now, let's have a look at the statistical consulting roles. What is the statistical consulting? I mean, I just wrote some of the phrase here. We never know what sort of the research problem is going to come through that door. This is from one of the famous U.S. real show. They said the foreign star. They said you never know what comes through that door, things like that. So yeah, actually, as a consultant, we never know what sort of the research problem we face it. That's the exactly. And then when the client comes to the first consultation, yeah, with that was the expectation about what the statistical consultant to do. And here is the most common role as a consultant we can play is there are four roles, and the helper, and leaders, and the collaborator, and the teachers. There are four consultants that they can play these kind of roles. Here's the diagram for the this one this diagram shows that the relationship between the client and the statistician. As you can see, the x-axis is statistician and y-axis is client. And those the x-axis is about the level of the activity, and also the y-axis is also the level of activity for the client. So first thing is, if the statistician is more like passive, and then whereas the client is more like active, then it becomes here like this one. It becomes the statistician becomes a helper. In other words, a technician, just do some sort of helping, crunching the number, that's all things. Whereas if the statistician is pretty much active, but the client is pretty much passive, then it becomes the statistician becomes a leader. So do all the sort of the works and everything. But ideal situation would be the collaborators. In other words, the statistician become a collaborator when the statistician is active, and the client also the active as well. In those cases, we call it a collaborator. So the statistician become a collaborator. That is the most ideal situation. And also if the statistician is pretty much active, and also the client is pretty much active, then the consultant becomes the problem-minded. But if the statistician is pretty much the passive, then the client is pretty much active. Then the way of approaching to the statistical consulting, it become the solution-minded. In other words, the client always asks what is the solution for that. I wanna get the answer straight away, things like that. And also the important thing, they become a good consultant is experience as well. So the more you have experience, the better. I mean, you can give them more better advice to the client. Therefore, they can be the good consultant. So needed here the experience as well. But those experience is never going to get it just one day or 2 days. It takes a while to get the experience. So let's have a look at the state consulting law as a helper. Yeah, like I said before, the helper law is characterized by the low level of the personal involvement on the part of the consultant. So the consultant acts just like the technician, and it responds to the client question and the direction. So, for example, the client needed just one or more specific information. So, for example, in this case, would it be better to learn a t-test or man with new test, things like that? If the client asks about that kind of question, then the consultant's job in this helper role is to supply the just information or the learn the other assets. So this is not the ideal situation that the state consultant being like these situations. Now as a leader, and the leader means there are some clients was a consultant to play leader roles. In other words, the client assume that the state consultant that take the responsibility for the making sense out of the client's data. So these days is more and more easily get the data. Therefore, there's some client, actually they just grab the data from the website or something like that, and then when they came to me and he sort of asked, is there any way that I can get some information from this data? And so my first reaction was that, what is the research case? What do you want to know about it? But he said, I don't know. So I just grabbed the data and I want to know about is there anything that I can get from the data? Then it would be great. So no, I can't do that wise. So it's like a situation like that. Then in this case, the consultant is sort of the player leader roles. But in this situation, you have to say that no, you can't do that way, because there's no solid research question at all. So you don't know exactly what you want to do. And then also the consultant assume that the leader roles may find themselves working in the area of the science in which they have little or no expertise. In other words, when the consultant take the leader roles, then there is a pitfall. So you have to be very careful about that. And also the data the client to provide is the client know much more better about the data than the client. So in other words, in this situation, this client is actively involved in the analysis and or consultation would be much better or more insightful, and then analysis will be much more possible. So the results might be much better. And also there's another pitfall there to the leader roles. For example, if the consultant did all the hard work as a leader, because of he is a leader, he took the leader roles. After the hard work, the footnote citation instead of the co-authorship, for example, in this case, it could happen. So one of the example might be one of the a while back, one of the students, a PhD student, came to me and he asked me that whether he can you can help me to analyze my data. I said, why is that? And he said we submit a paper one of the journal and we got rejected because of the lack of the statistical analysis. So I did all the major analysis, and he was happy, everyone is happy, and then I sort of thinking that, okay, in this case, it is a major, what I've done is a major core thing. So I'm sort of thinking that, okay, it's going to be the joint work or co-authorship. But he just put it, my name is in the acknowledgement. It's just say that, Jin, you have some sort of static advice. That's all. So this going to be happen like this when you take the leader roles in the static consulting. And the third one is the colleagues or collaborator. That is the ideal situation. So as a consultant, if you are limited to the role of the helpers and leaders, then few consultants would stay in the statistical consulting. because the in this role or the helper and leader, the two roles of these two roles is just one-way communication. As I mentioned, as I shown before, think about the relation diagrams. It's like just one way. There's no communication between the consultant and client. So this is not the ideal situation. The ideal situation would be the role of the colleagues. On the other hand, it doesn't necessarily involve the two-way communication. In other words, the consultant and the client communicate each other. That makes possible what is the joy of being a statistician. So in other words, working on and learn about the many different problems and sharing with the client the excitement of solving these problems. So this become the colleagues or collaborator is going to be one of the ideal situation that the study consultant face. The role of the collaborator is to make the consultant work to personally satisfy. This is the joy of being the statistical consultant. And the last one is like the teachers. So the good consulting rarely takes place in the absence of teaching. So in other words, the two are inseparable. So both the consultant and the client assume the teaching role at various times during the consultation. For example, the client learn about the design and the statistical issues and how to approach the similar problems in the future. The consultant learns about another area of the science. For example, if the client from the biology or medical science or computer science, engineering, you can learn about those areas as well. So teaching is take place quite naturally as the consultant and the client attempt to identify and formulate and clarify and reformulate their research questions. This is pretty much the natural being a teachers. Is those four are the major the state consulting laws. If you like, you can define that way. Now, so let's have a look at some challenge in the consulting. So here are some of the challenges associated with the static consulting in the university. And at the I don't know much about the commercial area, but in the university, there's I just write down the five the challenges. The first one is dealing with the human side of the consulting. And the next one is the consulting on the extreme wide range of the research firm because the clients are from the various disciplines. And then how to cope with the client having diverse statistical background. Some the client didn't have any statistical knowledge. Some have a limited statistical knowledge. How going to cope with those clients? And also the dispelling the inappropriate expectation about what we can and what we cannot do, things like that. So normally the client sort of expect that we can do everything, but sometimes we can't do it. And the last one is surviving in academy. Because sometimes the consultant in the university has got a heavy consulting load. Therefore, such a demand leaves a little time for us to pursue our own research. That is the challenge in studying consulting in the university.
Jen, if you could wrap up in the next couple of minutes, that'd be fantastic.
Yep, sure. So those one is the human side of the consulting is when we talk about the non-statistical skill, it's mainly about the interpersonal skill, right? And also in my experience, to be a good consultant, the consultant has to be empathetic and patient, so that you understand the need of the feeling of the client. So one of the examples might be one of my PhD students in medical school. Her final year of the PhD, or supervisor left ANUs without alternative arrangement. In other words, she left alone. So that at the time I wasn't at any supervisor or anything like that at all. So I have to help her to finish off her PhD. So that's the things. So in other words, you have to understand the client. Oops. And the next one is like they're having diversity background. Like I said, clients in the university seeks consultation on the extraordinary range of the research problem. And many research problems can handle some basic basic and some popular statistical procedure, but there's normally the when we encounter some sort of the encounter the statistical background, it's how should we proceed when the most appropriate statistical analysis for the client research project, because the knowledge that the client does not have. In those cases, we could do either we could be a leader or collaborator and supervising it. But the thing is that for the staff member, we can be the collaborator. But as the high degree research students, the better solution will be their supervisor. And the leader, consultant do not do the most but the leader role in the HDR students is not appropriate, because the students, HR students, has to do all the research work anyway. So we can't actually analyze the data for them. So therefore, for HR students, it's not a good idea to be the leader or collaborate, things like that. Have to be very careful about that. And
so make this the last slide. Is that possible?
Yeah. So what we can't do is like this. The worst dependent, the HR who has to rely on the advice of their supervisor. The often data is failed to address the question of the interest and may even defy the appropriate statistical. So that is also the another problem we face in the challenges. And this probably this one could be the last one in the survival in academic, as they often have a heavy consulting load. Therefore, we didn't have much time to do our own research. And also the university administrator has the traditional rewarded research and teaching and service. And this real system put the consultant at a disadvantage in achieving the academic promotion, things like that. But a lot of people know is that we are the invaluable, but also the invisible. That's the real problem in the academic situation.
Lovely. Look, Jen, I think we might leave it with that for everybody to ponder while we and can come back to some of these issues in the panel discussion. So thank you very much for raising a whole range of really important issues about how statistical consulting goes in a university environment. And it's now my very great pleasure to introduce our final panelist, Doug Zahn from Florida in the US. Doug has been referred to as the grandfather of statistical consulting, and has consulted and written about consulting and talked about consulting across a huge variety of settings. And we're delighted that he's able to present to us today. He has a book just out on stumbling blocks to stepping stones, and I'd like to thank a number of you who forwarded ideas around stumbling blocks that will be used to guide Doug's presentation and also possibly the panel discussion afterwards. So I'll pass over to Doug now. Doug, did you want me to show one of those documents and share screen? Was that the idea? Doug, I think you might need to just unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuting. First, I would like to know when you would like me to stop.
About somewhere between 10 past and 12:15 would be great.
And what time is it on your clock now?
11:58.
Yes.
Okay.
I got it.
All right, you got that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll tell me when there's 2 minutes left?
Yes. 12 minutes.
10 to 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's look at the the first slide, if there was some way of just looking at those 4 stumbling blocks.
Yeah, I can share a screen. That might be the more.
That's not it.
Yeah.
This one?
Nope.
Nope, the other one.
That's
That's something that I've never seen before.
Not that one?
Nope. Nope.
It wasn't that one? Let me check in the emails. How about that one? Is that the one you wanted?
no, it doesn't look anything
Nope,
like
they're all still saying host name, serial number, IP address, and domain name.
Sharing the wrong window, Alice.
Okay, let me try again.
Oh, okay.
How's that?
That's much better.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, this is the one I wanted. I would just like pretend that you can only read the first line. So thinking about Alice's title and for the session led me to think in terms of consulting more effectively in the 21st century. And I sent out Alice and Sue and numerous other angels sent out information to you folks for me. One of them was a question about what is the, I don't remember the exact wording, but what was the toughest stumbling block you encounter in your consulting practice? And 65 of you responded. I was gobsmacked, as the Brits would say. And I read them and I tried to summarize them. And so this is one summary of 4 of the stumbling blocks. And I'd like to look at them one at a time and how they relate to effective consultations and to the wanted conversation. So one of the stumbling blocks that was named by one of the respondents was when the data have already been collected and can't answer the question of interest. This is also known as a disaster. So my question when I see something like this is, how did this happen? And one of the places I look at is what I call the results or the definition of an effective consultation. And I think there are 3. First is that both parties know who will do what by when and the plan is implemented. Second is the results of the plan stand up to external scrutiny. And third is that the client regards the consultant as a valuable resource for future consultations. Now let's see how our first stumbling block measures up to this. Well, it doesn't, clearly. It's not clear that both parties knew who was going to do what. The results of the plan certainly is not going to stand up to external scrutiny because it doesn't answer the question of interest. And I doubt seriously that the client in this interaction will regard the consultant as a valuable resource for further consultations. So that's a disaster. Can you scroll that up a little bit, Alice?
How's
Wonderful.
that?
That's spectacular. Now, the wanted conversation is a tool that I think is the most valuable tool in my tool chest, and I recommend it to everyone who's interested in consulting more effectively in the 21st century. There's a wanted conversation and an expanded wanted conversation. The wanted conversation starts, first of all, with the consultant asking what result the client wants from this session. Now, had that been done in that first situation that's now up above the screen, the disaster would not have occurred because the consultant and the client would have been on the same page. Now, to make sure that that's the case, the consultant and the client clarify that this want is in fact a shared want. Then third, the consultant asks if the client has any more wants. Is there anything else the client wants to get out of this session? And I recommend doing this, asking this question early in the consultation, because there's no rule that says the client has to say their most important want, but the most important thing they want out of the session. There's no rule that says they've got to say that first. They might not say that until 4 or 5 or 6 other wants have been said, and they've identified that this is a safe place. So to avoid getting hit in the last 5 minutes of your consultation by a client saying, oh, there's an important question that I haven't asked you yet. So to avoid that, I highly recommend that you verify that you've got all of the client's wants on the table before beginning to work on any of them. So the fourth bullet is you both continue this process until the client agrees that the consultant understands all, underscore the all the client wants, because then there will not be the last minute surprise from the client. Hopefully. Now there's a couple of other questions that I include in what I call the expanded wanted conversation. One is, who are the stakeholders and what are their ultimate criteria for success? I mean, the client can tell you what his or her criteria for success is, but very often they are not the senior person on the team. And it's important to get in touch with who are the senior people and what are their criteria for success. And a related question is, how will the results of this study be used? Hopefully it will be used. It will not just be filed in a shelf to get dusty. But if you know how it will be used, it will help you in deciding, first of all, how many resources to invest in this project. And that's a key question. Okay, so that's the conversation about the first stumbling block that's up there. Now, Alice, could you show us the second one? Okay, being left out of the study design, taken in too late. This is a complaint I have heard throughout my career by statisticians who said, if the client would have just come to me earlier, I could have done some good work for them, but they took me in too late. My question is, how did this happen? And my assertion is that this happened because the consultant did not have a complete wanted conversation at the beginning of the study. And at the beginning, now you say, well, but what if the consultant isn't in the study yet at the beginning? Well, that's a problem. And often that does happen. And so when you discover that this has happened to you, what I would recommend doing is having a conversation with the researcher or the research team about the contributions you could have made to the study had you been included in it sooner. Now, it's important to do this with a velvet glove, because if they come away from this conversation thinking that you think that they are just a bunch of idiots, for lack of a more technical term, it's unlikely that they're going to include you in the second study. So it's important to be treating the client with respect, even when you didn't get into this study, you were left out of it, you didn't get the publication, maybe you didn't even get a footnote that like Jen had. So use this as a potential stepping stone to get into future studies of this group. And I promise you, you can do that if you treat them with respect and don't invite yourself in, but let them know what resources you could bring to the table if you were brought into the team earlier. Number 3 out there is one of my favorites because it was pointed out to me by one of my long-term collaborator, that when consultants complain about how much work is required to elicit the actual research question from the researcher, he asked me, what are you guys? Are you guys dentists? It sounds like you're pulling teeth to get information from the researcher. And I suspect there are some researchers out there who may feel that way. So again, the question is how to develop a relationship with the researcher that's cooperative, preferably, maybe collaborative, although that is usually further down the road. And then asking them, what is the question that they want to learn from this research? And if they say, I don't know, or it's my major professor's project and I don't know what the real research question is, then I would suggest inviting that the researcher invite the major professor to the next meeting so that the 3 of you can identify what the actual research question is. And I'd like to say a few words. Have I got a couple minutes left? Not really.
Couple of minutes.
Okay, couple minutes. I like number 4, what to do when I don't know what to do. Knowing how to say, I don't know. It took me a long time to learn how to do this. And it's really not hard. It's simple, it's just not easy. Because what to do when I don't know what to do is to tell the truth. I don't know what to do here. And I need some help, some guidance. Can you give me some suggestions as to where to go? So that's my suggestion as to what to do when you don't know what to do. Over to you, Alice.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you from everybody, I think, who've been interested to see these ideas about key stumbling blocks, and the notion of the wanted conversation, I think, is something that we can all take away. So thank you again, Doug. I'm going to stop sharing that document, and this is now the stage when so thank you to all our 4 panelists who are now available for questions. So please raise your hand, and I see Ben, I think, is going to kick things off with asking a question, and so take it away. Ben, unmute yourself and go for it.
Cool. Thanks everyone for the presentation. So really helpful and good. I actually have 2 questions, but I'll only ask one, not to be greedy. Relevant to what Graham was talking about, but everyone can answer. How much extra effort do you think is involved in recommending a better or more appropriate statistical technique for the problem you're being presented with to a client that might not, or they might need extra help to interpret the results of that technique? And do you think it's worthwhile going that extra step?
Who are you asking?
Graham? Graham, I think.
Graham. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it really depends on the circumstance to some extent. If I've got a PhD student fairly early in their PhD, then I'm more likely to make that extra effort for them to go further early on. Whereas if it's a commercial client or someone perhaps late in their PhD that's writing up, then the extra effort is not always well rewarded. So that would be my short answer to that.
Doug, did you want to chime in there as well?
Yeah, in the face of the very real possibility that Graham just mentioned, that if you do the extra effort, you may not be rewarded, you may not be paid for it, you may not get co-authorship, you may just get a footnote. To avoid surprises, I mean, I go back to the wanted conversation again, in terms of what does this client want relative to, are they interested in these additional analyses that you can see, Ben, with your expertise that maybe they cannot see with their expertise. And it's a sales job. I mean, we are salesmen, we're selling our services. And I don't think there's anything wrong with selling our services, provided we do it with a velvet glove, with a invitationally, rather than saying, you would be an idiot if you didn't do this analysis. That clearly is not going to get us anywhere.
That's too right. Ben, I hope that gives you some...
Yeah, does that answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
Fabulous. I noticed there were a couple of questions came in on the chat during the talks, particularly about asking about the conversation around co-authorship. I might throw that to Jin, to you, if you wanted to expand on anything about the conversation around co-authorship, and also to Doug. But Jin, did you want to say something about that? I think the original question was how and when do you negotiate authorship? Any tips? And a supplementary question: what about co-authorship compared to payment? But perhaps we'll start, Jin, with the conversation around co-authorship.
So basically, the statistical consulting unit at ANU is free of charge, and for the HDR students, the staff. So and also the co-author, as a consultant, we never ask the being a co-authorship, even though we have a lot of things. So we sort of generally waiting for them to invite us as a co-authors. So I don't know, see, there must be some sort of the regulation there, but so far, even though I've been here for 12 years, I never ask, I want to be a co-author because I did this. I never ask about that. But some staff and some of the PhD students who do know how to publish paper, things like that, even before they sort of ask, could you help me? And you become the co-authors in this paper, things like that. That's the generosity. But and also we didn't get any payment at all, so it's pretty hard. But we sort of heavily rely on the scientists. If they invite us, then we they're happy. But if they didn't invite at all, but still I can help them out anyway. So that's a good thing that I have them to publish the paper. So no question. Yeah, that's the hardest part. I mean, even though I did a lot, but to say that I should be in the co-author. No, I can't say like that. That's the thing.
Jen, I'm curious as to what stands between you and asking to be a co-author.
Basically, to me is I love my job. There's a consultant, and then they help them analyze their data and things like that. That's what I get. I mean, as long as I'm happy, yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So you're happy with your job.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
How many people are happy with their job? Not many.
Okay.
What you discovered on that footnote case is that if you want to be a co-author, it's a real good idea to ask to be a co-author. And the question was raised by Alice, I think, or somebody, as to when do you ask about being a co-author? I would say, if not in the first meeting, very close to that. I mean, early on, you see whether or not this project looks like it is rich enough to support a co-authorship. And I would have that conversation early on, because the later you wait, the harder it is to introduce that topic, and the more the client may feel really disappointed, reluctant, whatnot. I mean, it's an honorable thing to do. You're not asking for something that you haven't earned, but clients and consultants sometimes have intense disagreements about whether or not the consultant has put in enough work to be a co-author. And this brings me back to the wanted conversation again, in terms of, if you want to be a co-author, then I say it's time to have a conversation with the client about what is your definition of what's required to be a co-author, what is the client's definition of what is required to be a co-author, and then talking about that until you can bring those two together, or not. If you can't, then don't work with that client if you expect to be a co-author.
But the problem is most of the client is a PhD student.
Yes.
So I can't actually ask.
Why can't you be asking PhD students? They're going to be out working for a government agency or a company or something, making 3 times as much as you are within 2 years.
But if the students just started their PhD, then they don't know exactly what sort of things outcome they're going to get. So it's so hard to say that the should be at the co-authors, things like that. So.
Well, I invite you to consider that.
Thanks, Doug. I'd like to keep things moving along as the questions are starting to flow in. David Warden posed one in the chat earlier as well. David, did you want to expand on your question at all, or shall I just take it straight out of the chat?
Yeah, not really.
I'll take it straight out of the chat.
Okay. Yeah, you go.
So David, in these COVID times, wanted to ask the panel about how's your consulting activity changed in the face of COVID-19. So perhaps I'll throw that one to Elise and Graham. Elise, did you want to say how have things changed over in the West with COVID?
Hi, yes, you can hear me still? Yes.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, so we obviously did go into lockdown. So I guess we're a little bit lucky that we were able to work from home. But we were affected, I guess, because we consult with other companies, and the effect onto them, may have delayed some projects and things like that. Also, we do like survey work, and we may recommend like door-to-door or face-to-face surveys, and we, in some situations, we had to redesign the survey to be a telephone survey, for instance. But yeah, I guess we worked through it, and we're back in the office in Western Australia now, and yeah, things are going well. Yeah. Was Graham gonna?
Yeah, Graham, did
add
you
in that? Yeah.
Oh, it's the nature of the work has changed very little, really. I've found, as far as the content, it's just made all the consultations more tiring and more concentrated. Harder to have those sort of downtimes that you naturally have in an in-person consultation, and so yeah, you've just got to try and monitor fatigue on both sides.
Well, thanks for that. Olena raised your hand. Would you like to put your
Can I say
question?
something to Graham?
Okay, Doug,
Quick, yeah. Boundaries are super critical at this time because of how accessible everybody is 24/7. So it's up to you to set some boundaries so you can get some good sleep, et cetera, et cetera. That was one thing. There was one other thing I was going to say, but I forgot what it was. So carry on.
if it comes to you, just jump on it. Olena.
I know what it is. I did.
Yeah,
You asked the question, how has your work life changed? Mine has changed enormously occasionally. Like, I've never done this before with anybody in Australia. And it's wonderful to be able to talk with you folks and for us to be able to interact on all these things, continent to continent, without having to fly 12 hours in an airplane.
Yeah,
so that's great.
Totally agree. Elena, we'll get to, Elena, we'll get to you.
Yeah, thanks, Edis. I was just picking on Jean's comment that consulting is for free for PhD students. Now trying to organize all the nitty-gritty for my consulting group. It's not for free, Jean. You still have to report to whoever is above you about your salary. And your salary is actually linked to the research income your PhD students you are seeing are bringing to the university. And in my experience, and I know that many on this in this group, they have experiences in their universities to negotiate the funding scheme for their units. The more transparent you are to what sort of income you are contributing, the more understanding you will get to the value of your research time as opposite to, training time. Am I making myself clear? So if you are an academic consulting unit, your salary is linked to either teaching or research projects or research students. And the clearer you are how this link works, the more sustainable your position is, the more sustainable your position of the unit is, and the more you understand how much your hour costs. So that's all. It's just my comment because I've been thinking about this consulting for free, which is never for free. That's it.
Thanks, Elena. I think that's a really valid point to raise. Did the panel want to pick up on that, or we'll move on to? I think Ben's got a follow-up question.
Yeah. There's fascinating stuff in the group chat that I encourage everybody to read. Not right now because you're going to listen to Bing's question.
Yeah, good point. There's a bit of action going on there, so try some multitasking. But Ben, you want to ask a follow-up question?
It's an unrelated question, so if there's someone else that had something more specific.
No, I think you've got the floor.
Okay, so it's a very specific question. The scenario is you're talking to somebody with a minimal understanding of statistics. They just normally click buttons in SPSS and get numbers out, and they need something more advanced. So you're explaining to them how to interpret a frequentist confidence interval. What is your lay explanation for that confidence interval? Anyone take it away?
Over to Graham.
In our centre we talk about these sort of things quite a bit, and we would say an interval within which we are 95% sure we're pretty sure that the true value lies, or an interval that is consistent with the data, a range of values of the parameter that is consistent with the data. And if we think they can cope with the more technical probabilistic explanation, well and good, but that sort of layperson's explanation seems to be sufficient, and we also put that in reports if they're at a reasonably non-technical level. silence.
Yep. Well, we'll take that as a strong answer. So thanks for that. And there's a couple more questions I'd like to go to. Nick Fisher, your hand is up. Did you want to ask something?
Yep.
Yep.
My internet's dying. Okay. Okay, great. I'm back. So, yeah, so thank you all so much. I was just wondering if you have any common phrases or sound bites that you come back to help with this like wanted part of the conversation. So personally, I found things like, what are you measuring, or what's the outcome, like surprisingly really like elucidating, because like sometimes they'll just stop and be like, well, and then like, and that can be really useful. I was just wondering, like, do you have anything like that you sort of like to use? And this is a question to all the panelists, but yeah.
Elise, any thoughts on that one?
I personally don't have any like general phrases that I use to all clients, I guess, because we have such a wide variety of clients here, and each I don't know, it's quite yeah. I guess just try to get their views on what they want and what the research is going to be used for, and understand their timing, and I guess just ask as many questions as you need to understand what they're trying to get out of it. And I'll hand it over to someone else.
Jen Graham?
Yeah, so it's probably I always ask, what is your research question? That is the most important thing. So based on that research question, I can give advice, some sort of what sort of method you have to use to analyze your data, things like that. But in the end, that research, that data belongs to the students or client. So I always say, you are the expertise in that data, so you have to explain to me what sort of data you do have, why you collected this kind of data. Then I can give you the right advice for the statistical method, things like that. So the most important thing is like Doug says, you have to ask as many as you can, as many questions, so that you can get some information out of that the client or students. That is I think that is the best way to communicate with the client. That's the things. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Jen. There's two more hands up that I can see, Christy and Kim, and I realise that we're getting close to the end time. So I might just grab a quick moment to check that our consultants are able to stay on the line stay in the meeting for a few more minutes to answer a couple more questions, if that's okay. So I've got a few nods, and for those who need to leave, thanks so much for coming along today. But Christy, your question, please.
Yeah, so it's a bit specific as well. That's why I was kind of waiting to the end, and it might really only be appropriate for Elise, but I do find sometimes that it's very difficult to deal with certain older, perhaps surgeons that I'm dealing with in the medical field, who have a very strong belief in their understanding of statistics and what analyses or design, etc., is appropriate, and kind of guiding them in the role, your role as the statistician, to where you want them to go gently, and whether you have any advice with dealing with particularly difficult customers, I guess.
That is a difficult one. Sorry, just trying to have a think for particular clients that I can relate it to. Yeah, I guess a lot of the clients that I deal with don't have much statistical background, so they will often take our advice, I guess. But
you're very lucky.
although, like, I guess with, you know, timing constraints and things like that, they may not want to pursue certain things that you may think is more appropriate, I guess. And yeah, I guess it can be a challenge, but yeah, that I'm not sure I have any specific advice on how to deal with that situation.
Do any of the other panelists have any advice on steering someone in along a path that you're more comfortable with?
Looks like you've got Doug with his hand up.
Right, because I don't know how to make the hand go up on the computer. So this is an old-fashioned hand. Christy, you raise an important question and a difficult question. You're in a tough situation. You are a young female in a medical community, which is, I suspect, well, in the if you were in the US, I would say it was male-dominated and older males, and they are stereotyped as not being particularly open for input, especially input that's a little bit at odds with what they're thinking from especially young females. So you are in a difficult situation. So let's just acknowledge that up front. Now, what can you do? I think, again, I go back to my wanted conversation. I mean, that's my Boy Scout knife, jack of all trades. It's a place that I go. That's, somebody asked a question as to, do you have any questions you ask regularly? Yeah, it's, what do you want to get out of this session? And I can't guarantee what would happen if you ask that to one of your senior surgeons. They may say, well, you should know what I want. You've seen me, you've worked with surgeons before, and we've done studies like this before.
Yeah, they want to tell you less than 0.05, and they're quite happy to tell you that as well.
All right. And what is your response to that?
I laugh at them and say, that's not, my job's not to find p-values less than 0.05. But yeah, I do tend to start the conversations with those kind of, you know, what are we getting out of this session today? What are we getting out of the project together? Where, yeah, and I agree that they're great starting points, but at some stage along the line, it's whether you do what they want you to do and they stop annoying you, or you really dig your heels in and say no. And I think being able to deal with that in a fashion that makes everyone happy is very difficult.
It's very difficult. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you go.
Okay, 3 thoughts came to mind, and I'm not sure I can grab all 3 of them, but one, let me just say this, and I'm not saying this, I'm saying this because I believe it and I find it useful. I'm not saying it to get a reaction. But I firmly believe that there are no difficult clients. Now, that opens up a whole lot of possibilities. You can say, here comes another surgeon, he's locked in his way, he's been doing these studies for 10 years, 20 years, and he's a person who I would have thought was a difficult client, but thanks to Alice and Sue that they got together this webinar and we talked about there's no difficult clients. So the question is to be talking with them, what is it that they want to do and why do they think it's more effective than the analysis you have? And it's important not to get into a wrestling match in this. I want to help you do the best study. You've done an enormous amount of work in getting the data and everything that you've done up to this point in time. My goal is to help you with the statistical part of this and make sure that you publish the strongest article you can get out of it. And you said you've been doing these kind of studies for 15 years, and I don't doubt that. But what I do know about the statistics community is that in the area that you're working in, I'm making this up now, that there's been a lot of research done in the last 15 years, and it may be that some of these tools that have been discovered in the last 15 years will help you to produce a stronger article than you would have if you used your tools from 15 years ago. So those are the kinds of
that's really good. That's really helpful. Thank you.
It's opening up some doors, but those are the kind of doors you can open up if you let go of the thought, the attitude that this is a difficult client.
Yeah.
What a fantastic thought there. I'll just, in the last couple of minutes, invite Kim to put her question. Thanks, Kim Colivas.
Okay, my question is for Elise. I was interested in the idea of reproducible work for others when you were talking about we always code things up and we do it reproducibly. So given that you've got a vast array of clients, what do the coding things end up being? Do you standardize on a language or two, or do you do it in, say, the top of the package that the customer has? What happens?
We tend to use the statistical package R for a lot of the work, although some clients may require things done in other things. Like some clients may just want a simple Excel tool with a macro in it, or but within R, I guess, is a package that all the consultants here are familiar with, and yeah, we can review each other's code and take off where someone left off. And can you specify what your question exactly was again? Is that?
You're answering my question. So what you've done, standardized on R as your in-house tool, and you're also educating clients through the interaction with it.
Yeah, so they often wouldn't see the actual coding that we do, but yeah, the outputs from it, and if we suggest that the data gets updated, or if we're provided data on a yearly basis, for instance, we can go back to the code and have a look to see. We can just reuse the code, but have a look what's different about the data to make sure it's still appropriate. So it does need to be checked each time, and yeah, and updated to the context of what the data is.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Elise.
So you have to be very careful about using those command-driven packages. Like, for example, these days it's pretty easy to get those code from the website. So there's some client and some students that just grab the code from the website and using it. So in other words, without thinking that what sort of data that I have, just plugged in and get an output. That output is pretty much the wrong things to do. So you have to be very careful about the code to give the client. So the OS, the R code might be depend on what sort of data you do have. That also not only the data type, but also the sort of what sort of the method you're going to using to analyze the data is also depend on the data type as well. So have to be very careful about that. And I got one of the client, the staff members is using simply grab the code and running the analysis, and then all the disasters. I mean, he used just using the regression model with the counter data. So it could happen all the time. So has to be very careful. So I don't normally recommend those command-driven package at all. Just using the pull-down menu, that is the best one for the students, I guess.
That's a great point. And Jen, I think we're on that slight warning. I think we might have to wrap up here today. We've gone over time a little, and so I'd like to wrap up the formal parts of the proceedings. Apologise to those whose questions we haven't got to, but Francis from Canberra branch reminds me that everyone here should feel free to email ssaccanberra@gmail.com if you're interested in getting in touch with one of the panelists or getting in touch with getting hold of the slides. This talk has also been recorded, and so we can make the recording available for those who are interested. So it just remains for me to thank everybody for coming along and staying with us through this panel discussion. Thank you to our 4 presenters, Elise, Graham, Jin and Doug, and best wishes to everybody. Looking forward to the next SSA presentation or NZSA presentations as they are advertised to you. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll finish up there.